Welcome to the University of Oklahoma and the Sam Noble Museum of Natural History. I'm Rick Luce. I'm the Dean of Libraries at the University of Oklahoma, and it's my pleasure to be able to just open up this symposium today. Before introducing our Master of Ceremonies, I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to highlight why Galileo's world portends a new relationship between the university libraries, our special collections, and the University of Oklahoma. Research libraries are the intellectual commons of a university. They're places that connect the past to the present. They link ideas together. They collide disciplines and fields of study. They have done so for centuries. However, today, as we witness the disruption of changes now underway within the emergence of things like e-research, data-driven science, and digital humanities, our special collections become increasingly important as laboratories for scholarship that support knowledge creation, both locally in the form of atoms, such as books and archives, and virtually in the form of bits that can be computed on and transmitted anywhere. Just as our Galileo's World exhibition illustrates our collections, together with the programming, exhibitions, and teaching spaces and activities built around those collections, they also communicate and connect communities of scholars and students around the world in collaborative and multidisciplinary ways, while also serving the international research community by spawning digital projects that are transforming scholarship and research methods today. And we will hear more about that in this symposium. While the rapid changes brought by technological disruption have resulted in many university general collections that have been traditionally managed being disrupted and in many ways commoditized and undifferentiated, special collections, unique materials, those rare and one-of-a-kind artifacts and cultural treasures, are entering a period of a new renaissance. Quoting from The Power of Pull, how small moves, smartly made, can set big things in motion, quote, "Big repositories of knowledge, left by themselves, don't give a university a major advantage anymore. It's having access to the knowledge flowing at the cutting edge that really enables innovation." So knowledge flows are now overtaking knowledge stocks in importance. By flows, the authors are talking about interconnected conversations, interactions, and intellectual connections. In such a world, fostering interactions and engagement and fostering communities are absolutely essential. And in such a world, rare and unique materials become increasingly valuable, especially if we pivot from a collection-centric focus to an engagement-centered focus, where our value stems from the kinds of interactions that we provide and support, and especially if we act on the threads opened at this conference and in other venues to use the power of the internet to connect our collections in a manner that leads to flow. Today, the OU Library is evolving to be a very different entity and a very different kind of institution than the paradigm for libraries that my generation grew up with. Let me give you 3 quick examples. We support collaboration today. In fact, we enable and foster collaboration, group work, and especially group learning. Not just learning in a group, but learning how to be effective in a group. Secondly, we are becoming partners in data stewardship, data curation, and data visualization. Thirdly, We actively enable co-creation. Today, new knowledge is not just transmitted, it must be co-created. Galileo's world is an expression of this vision, as well as an exhibition without walls, a year-long project featuring a series of 20 exhibits and events at 7 locations across all 3 OU campuses. Highlighting over 350 rare books, just the tip of the iceberg of the 100,000 that we possess. Rare books from the OU Library Special Collections, alongside early scientific instruments, interactive displays, and contributions from our exhibition partners, representing the influences on their respective fields, and a robust interactive website with online resources, including digitized access to the works on display and tools for educators. Galileo's world explores connections between science, art, literature, music, religion, philosophy, politics, and culture, both in the world of Galileo, but also in the world of today. Perhaps most importantly, this exhibition will live on in virtual space. While most conferences are devoted to a single disciplinary focus, today's conversation is intentionally multidisciplinary. Galileo's world challenges us to look beyond the walls of specific college departments and disciplines to see the connections and the creativity in innovative approaches to research. Our Master of Ceremonies and moderator for today's symposium is the creative mind and curator of Galileo's world, Dr. Kerry Magruder. Professor Magruder earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from Truman State University in Missouri, a master's in library science, and a doctorate in the history of science from Oklahoma University. His background includes teaching high school chemistry and biology, directing a university planetarium, and teaching university astronomy, geology, science education, and of course the history of science. Since 2000, Dr. Magruder has served in the University of Oklahoma's library's History of Science collections. In 2009, he became curator, and in 2011, he received the John and Drusa Cable Chair. Professor Magruder has presented scholarly talks in many academic conferences, universities, and research labs in both America and Europe. An online Galileo exhibit by Magruder was recognized with the Best of the Web Award from the Griffith Planetarium in 2006. He has presented talks on Galileo at the Fermi Lab Accelerator in Chicago area and at NASA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. He has also served as a content consultant for Beautiful Science exhibition of the Huntington Library, which won the American Association of Museums Excellence in Education Award for Best New Exhibit in 2009. His recently published articles deal with geology, cosmology, Galileo, and science and religion in the early modern period. Please join me in welcoming our MC and moderator today, Dr. Kerry Magruder.
Welcome and thank you for coming to the Galileo's World Symposium. The full title of the exhibition is Galileo's World, Bringing Worlds Together. 3 quick stories illustrate this. First, consider this book, bound and cased in a typical Asian style. Johann Schreck was a friend of Galileo's who assisted him during his telescopic discoveries. A few years later, Schreck went to China, where he wrote this work on engineering in Chinese with Chinese collaborators. How many of our Asian students know Galileo had a friend in China? Here's a second example. This book by Francesco Hernandez is the most important early natural history of the Americas. Hernandez spent half a dozen years with Aztecs in central Mexico, compiling their botanical and medical knowledge. Galileo and his colleagues in the Academy of the Links worked many long years to publish it. It finally appeared in 1651. This copy is a 1628 draft. How many of our Native American and Hispanic students appreciate that botanical and medical knowledge of the natives of central Mexico, that was important to Galileo and his colleagues in the Academy of the Links, and helped transform European natural history nearly 400 years ago into a global endeavor. Consider a third story. Johann Hevelius was the leading European telescopic observer in mid-17th century astronomy. This massive book was the first comprehensive lunar atlas. It accurately mapped the moon less than 40 years after Galileo's telescopic discoveries. On the frontispiece of this same work, Hevelius portrays Ibn al-Haytham, a leading medieval Islamic astronomer and optical theorist. On the right, holding a telescope, is Galileo. Who would have guessed that one of the most impressive works of the scientific revolution would portray Galileo in Middle Eastern dress as a tribute to the tradition of medieval Islamic science? So we've seen that Galileo's world brings together worlds as far removed as Asia, America, and the Middle East. If Galileo's world brought worlds together in the past, then what might a Galileo's World exhibition accomplish for us at the University of Oklahoma today? So with Galileo's World, we are bringing worlds together. We are connecting the world of OU with the world of Galileo. Creating conversations about these connections is our way of celebrating the 125th anniversary of the university. So I think back to the story of David Ross Boyd, which every student and faculty member here knows. Boyd accepted the position of university president by mail. When he arrived in Norman expecting to see an established university with buildings, he found only a dusty town of 600 people and a barren prairie. In his diary, he wrote, "While some might have been discouraged, I only see possibilities." We immortalize Boyd's vision in the planting of trees and the sower spirit of OU. This is the very soul of the university. In the reading nook on the first floor of the library, we start with David Ross Boyd and the story of OU. The central panel reads, "It has never been more important than now to understand our own past. The forces that moved us in the past formed our character, shaped our understanding of the world around us, imparted to us a sense of possibility. In this sense, we are children of the frontier. We are pioneers. We are shaped by our landscape and our history, those who journeyed here by coercion or force, those who persevered through many trials, who remained undaunted through the Dust Bowl years, who created a global oil industry, who pioneered aviation and aerospace exploration, and those who built Oklahoma's flagship university bear comparison with those we hold as symbols of the Renaissance as we explore connections between Galileo's world and the world of OU today. The people of Florence committed to building a cathedral so large it was impossible by any method then known to construct a dome upon it. Yet when the time came, almost miraculously, they found a way to do it, by far the largest masonry dome ever built up to that time. The story of Brunelleschi's dome is like the story of OU. What possibilities? OU and Tuscany have a deep cultural affinity. So on the opposite wall of the reading nook, we juxtapose the world of Renaissance Tuscany. With the Galileo collection of the History of Science collections, we might even say that a little bit of Tuscany has been transplanted to the windswept plains of Oklahoma. So now the story of Galileo is part of every student's and researcher's experience at OU, connecting our worlds across time and space. Through exploring the world of Galileo, we may recover our own past and find added meaning for our endeavors now and into the future. To make these connections, the Galileo's World exhibition offers something for everyone. Like the university, it's multivalent. There are top 10 tours in art, international studies, meteorology, women in science, and many more. What would your favorite top 10 tour be like? Would it be one of these, or would it be a custom tour of your own design? Now, maybe I'm dreaming a little, but I would like to imagine how might each of our speakers today design their own top 10 tour for us. So, let's imagine a tour by Teresa Marks, our luncheon speaker. She is the Assistant Dean for Academic Student Services of the OU College of Engineering. What kind of tour might she offer us? Well, this past summer, a number of students in engineering, along with some from art and architecture, went to Pisa to study the tower, both from an engineering standpoint and from the perspective of the history of art and architecture. As the front porch of Galileo's world, they then created a 1/10 scale replica. Teresa Marks was the team lead for that project, so I'm sure we would make our first stop on the tour here. A heavy steel ball and a lightweight lucite ball drop from the cupola, with times of their fall recorded and displayed on a panel below. Students can then watch the balls be carried back up to the cupola by an Archimedean screw. Perhaps next, Teresa would take us up to the Galileo Engineer Gallery on the 5th floor, where one may examine works illuminating Galileo's life as a scientist-engineer. The book on the left displays a machine designed by Agostino Romelli, a generation before Galileo, which employs the Archimedean screw mechanism for transporting water. It is open to this page as a tribute to the OU Tower of Pisa project. On the right is the same machine from a book in the Galileo in China gallery. Teresa earned a BA in Fine Arts and a master's in art history. So the next stop on her tour might take us to the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art for their exhibit, An Artful Observation of the Cosmos. This beautiful exhibit shows the fusion of art and science through a combination of works of art from their own holdings and books from the History of Science collections juxtaposed together. The Fred Jones brings the worlds of art and science together. Finally, I feel positive that Teresa would point out the Tuscany Top 10 tour, here shown in a screenshot from the iPad exhibit guide. The description of each of these 10 items refers to something one might see on a trip to Florence. The College of Engineering has an ambitious study abroad program, and Teresa serves as the College of Engineering Study Abroad liaison. She has taught engineering students from OU's campus in Arezzo, integrating science and engineering with the specific artistic and cultural heritage of Renaissance Tuscany. So maybe these are a few places we would go and things we would see on a tour of Galileo's world with Teresa Marks. I can't wait for her presentation today about the OU Tower of Pisa project. For our next tour, we might have the privilege of being led by Paolo Galluzzi, one of the leading historians of Renaissance science in the world. Professor Galluzzi has been director of the Museo Galileo in Florence since 1982. He was a long-standing editor-in-chief of Nuncius, an international journal for the history of science. He currently chairs the national edition of Galileo's works. This week, in fact, Professor Galluzzi generously presented us with the latest volume, which has just been published, for Galileo's works are still being updated. Perhaps Professor Galluzzi might take us first to the National Weather Center. More rare books are on display there than at any other location outside the library. At the National Weather Center, there is a tribute to the Museo Galileo, where we thank them for their partnership and support of the Galileo's World exhibition. In part, it reads, "The Museo Galileo in Florence is one of the foremost international institutions in the history of science and the leading research center for Galileo studies in the world. They combine a renowned collection of scientific instruments with an impressive rare book library, publish numerous journals and specialized monographs, and sponsor the Galileoteca digital library to support scholarly research. In addition, this research institute on the bank of the Arno River has become one of the most acclaimed public attractions in the city of Florence. State-of-the-art educational exhibits and learning laboratories both inspire and instruct increasing numbers of school groups and visitors, including OU students, visiting from our new campus in nearby Arezzo. At the National Weather Center, we would see a polyhedral sundial and a replica of Galileo's thermoscope, an ancestor to the thermometer. These are two of the instrument replicas provided by the Museo Galileo for this exhibition. The Accademia del Cimento, or Academy of Experiment in Florence, pioneered meteorological investigation using the thermometer, barometer, and air pump. The Museo Galileo holds the original instruments from this group that are reported in these works. Next, Professor Galuzzi might take us to the Sam Noble Museum. Last semester, it hosted a joint exhibition on the natural history of Hernandez, which I mentioned earlier. This semester, a new exhibit explores the topic of Galileo and microscopy. So that's just upstairs, and I hope you get a chance to see it. An opening section presents the Accademia dei Lincei, or Academy of the Lynx, the early scientific society which counted Galileo as a member. Professor Galuzzi is a member of the Accademia dei Lincei. Prince Federico Chesi, the patron and founder of the Academy of the Lynx, is here shown alongside Galileo. One of Professor Galuzzi's recent publications is the first important in-depth study of the relationship between Galileo and Chesi. No one could give us a better tour of this exhibit than Professor Galuzzi. For each gallery, the Museo Galileo provided brief video tutorials. These are high-quality, photorealistic animations, each less than 5 minutes long. Look for different videos in almost every location, 35 in all. Here at the Sam Noble Museum, another instrument replica is on display. The microscope by Campani was once attributed to Galileo himself. The Lincei published the Apiarium, the first report of observations made with a microscope. On the website of the Museo Galileo, one may compare all 4 extant printed copies in an online variorum, including the OU copy. On a nearby wall, Sam Noble visitors may examine a translation of the Apiarium by OU alumna Clara Sue Kidwell and formatted for this exhibit by Leah Vanderberg. Next on the tour, we might go to the 5th floor of Bazell Memorial Library. If you haven't been there for a while, it's changed. This is how it looks now. And we would return to the Galileo Engineer Gallery, where we previously noticed the book on machines by Romelli. Here is a book on fortifications by Larini. Drawing upon Archimedes, Larini asserted that all machines could be reduced to the balance and thus to the lever. From his home in Padua, Galileo taught a private course on fortifications. Both Larini and Galileo were shaped by a common Florentine tradition in engineering. In the nearby exploration room, we might sit down in a comfy chair and explore Professor Galuzzi's book, Renaissance Engineers, from Brunelleschi to Leonardo. Galileo's first and rarest printed book is a manual for his engineering compass. The Museo Galileo provided a high-quality replica of Galileo's compass for display alongside the OU copy of the book. Up on the Health Sciences campus in Oklahoma City, this book by Borelli has been on display. I suspect Professor Galuzzi might take us up there. Borelli, a practicing mathematician and engineer as well as a physician, analyzed the musculoskeletal system in terms of the mechanics of the lever and other simple machines. Borelli studied under Galileo's student Castelli and was a member of the Academy of Experiment in Florence. Another Museo Galileo thermoscope is on display at the Byrd Library. Also shown here is a book by Santorio Santorio, a physician friend of Galileo's. Together they experimented with the thermoscope. Because of the scale affixed to the instrument as depicted in this book, we could accurately call it a thermometer. Physicians such as Borelli and Santorio applied to medicine the physical principles which occupied Galileo in his physics. Finally, no tour by Professor Galuzzi would fail to take us to the Fred Jones, a replica of Galileo's telescope provided by the Museo Galileo, rests adjacent to OU's copy of the Sidereus Nuncius, Galileo's starry messenger. the first published report of observations with a telescope. This is the book and the instrument that caused an immediate international sensation, with Galileo's report of mountains on the moon, the 4 large satellites of Jupiter, and countless numbers of unsuspected stars. Near the telescope is this work by Pacioli. Pacioli was a friend of Leonardo's, and the geometrical diagrams in the back of Pacioli's book were drawn by none other than Leonardo. They demonstrate true perspective and a mastery of light and shadow. These diagrams were the only materials ever put in print by Leonardo during his own lifetime. Professor Galuzzi has published several books on Leonardo and chairs the national edition of Leonardo's manuscripts and drawings. An artful observation of the cosmos also includes the first printed book with Leonardo's name on the title page, his treatise on painting. It was published over 100 years after his death. Another edition in French is on display in the Schusterman Library on the OU Tulsa campus. There in Tulsa, we may also view this remarkable work, a book of paper instruments like the one on the right, and the first star atlas to plot the positions of stars according to a 2-dimensional grid. Now, this may be a coincidence, but it is by Paolo Galuzzi. And I wonder if there is any relation between this 16th century author and our speaker today. So maybe those are a few things we would see on a tour with Professor Galuzzi. I can't wait for his presentation today, unveiling the Galileoteca Digital Library for Scholarly Research. Our next imaginary tour is led by Dr. Tony Hay, Commander of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. It's just wonderful to even say that as an American. Thank you. Hay served as Vice President of Microsoft Research Connections from 2005 to 2014. Before that, he graduated from Oxford with bachelor's and master's degrees in physics. As a particle physicist, Dr. Hay might take us first to the New Physics Gallery, where we may view the Ficino edition of Plato's dialogue, the Timaeus. In the Timaeus, Plato constructed all elements and even the cosmos itself from geometrical particles, that is, from the 5 regular solids of the Pythagoreans. Dr. Hay might then tell us that the Timaeus is therefore the first work in particle physics. It was never forgotten. Later writers built upon it, as did Kepler in his blueprints of the Copernican universe, also on display in the New Physics Gallery. Dr. Hay served as a postdoctoral fellow in physics at Caltech and worked with Richard Feynman and Murray Gell-Mann, both winners of the Nobel Prize in Physics. He then moved to Geneva, Switzerland as a fellow of CERN for several years. He held a position in particle physics for about 15 years at the University of Southampton, with visiting fellowships at Caltech and MIT, following in the footsteps of Plato and Kepler, I would say. So perhaps he would pass out to us, to those of us on his tour, this learning leaflet which introduces the properties of the 5 regular solids, or this learning leaflet that describes how Kepler used the solids to prove Copernicus, constructing the blueprints of the universe in his first book published in 1596. Next, Dr. Hay might have us attempt to replicate Galileo's inclined plane experiments, by which Galileo established the law of free fall. Even with this precision instrument, we might experience difficulties obtaining consistent and reliable data. Dr. Hay might prompt us to consider how larger data sets might help us overcome experimental limitations. After the New Physics Gallery, Dr. Hay might bring us back to the Galileo Engineer Gallery, where we would learn how to use Galileo's compass and the slide rule and explore the history of computing. For Dr. Hay moved from particle physics into computer science in the mid-1980s. In 1986, he became professor of computation at Southampton and dean of engineering and applied science in 1999. In 1990, he served as a visiting fellow at IBM Research. And in 1998, he was a visiting fellow at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. A learning leaflet he might offer us here would be about Ada Lovelace, who wrote the first computer program long before computers even existed. And then Dr. Hay might stop beside this letter, signed by Albert Einstein, and tell us more about his book, Einstein's Mirror, which provides an easy-to-understand explanation of relativity. Other books by Dr. Hay include the Feynman Lectures on Computation, the Computing Universe, the New Quantum Universe, and the Fourth Paradigm, Data-Intensive Scientific Discovery. Kepler's Rudolphine Tables is filled with page after page of calculated positions of the planets. Dr. Hay might lead us to wonder how we might make sense of such a mass of calculations. I would not be surprised if Dr. Hay paused his guided tour at the China Gallery to note the benefits of interoperable data. European techniques of map making, coupled with Chinese skill and knowledge, led to a remarkable series of 17th century maps of China printed in both China and in Europe. In the late 17th century, about a dozen Jesuits began a 30-year project to map the entirety of China. They plotted longitude and latitude coordinates for more than 600 locations. As a result, both Chinese and European geographers had access to maps constructed from the same geographical data, all based on the meridian of the Paris Observatory. And that's hard to achieve in any age. I feel confident Dr. Hay would not leave us at the end of our tour without emphasizing that every book on display will be digitized in its entirety and made freely available online in high resolution with descriptive metadata. He would explain to us how difficult it is to establish a state-of-the-art workflow moving from digitization to an open access repository with data curation and sustainability over time. Perhaps that is what a tour by Dr. Hay might be like. I can't wait for Dr. Hay's presentation this afternoon on Galileo, new technology, and big data. Our next imaginary tour is led by a research astronomer who works for the Vatican. Last September, Brother Guy Consolmagno was named director of the Vatican Observatory by Pope Francis. Brother Guy obtained his bachelor's and master's degrees at MIT and his doctoral degree at the University of Arizona's Lunar and Planetary Laboratory, all in planetary science. After postdoctoral research and teaching at Harvard College Observatory and MIT, in 1983 he joined the Peace Corps and served in Kenya for 2 years, teaching astronomy and physics. Perhaps one of Brother Guy's first stops for us would be the Space Science After Galileo Gallery, especially the section on planets. Brother Guy's research is centered on the connections between meteorites and asteroids and the origin and evolution of small bodies in the solar system. In this book by Christian Huygens, Huygens took up questions of the habitability of other planets and the existence of extraterrestrial life. Now, if you're curious about Huygens, you might be interested to know that Brother Guy has written a book entitled, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? And other questions from the astronomer's inbox at the Vatican Observatory. Brother Guy's many popular works include The Heavens Proclaim, Astronomy in the Vatican, that's a history of the Vatican Observatory, Worlds Apart, which is a textbook in planetary sciences, Turn Left at Orion, 100 night sky objects to see in a small telescope and how to find them, a classic for amateur astronomers. God's Mechanics, How Scientists and Engineers Make Sense of Religion, and Brother Astronomer, Adventures of a Vatican Scientist. So how did the Jesuits become astronomers? In the controversy over the Comets Gallery, Brother Guy might point us to an introductory text in astronomy by the Jesuit Christoph Clavius. In the 16th century, Clavius established astronomy as an essential area of study in Jesuit schools. Brother Guy might also point us to the New Almagest by Riccioli, a standard astronomical compendium published in the generation after Galileo. In many ways, the Jesuits were at the forefront of astronomical research in the time of Galileo. In 1989, Consolmagno entered the Society of Jesus and took vows as a brother in 1991. On entry into the order, he was then assigned as an astronomer to the Vatican Observatory and became curator of its collection of meteorites. Over in the China Gallery, Brother Guy might point out the working tools of Jesuit astronomers like Adam Schall von Bell, who became a trusted advisor to the first Qing emperor and published numerous books in Chinese with Chinese collaborators. Or he might point out that before Jesuit astronomers were asked to create the Vatican Observatory, they first built one in Beijing. Brother Guy might explain how there were scientific reasons at the time to support Tycho's Earth-centered cosmology over that of Copernicus. The Copernican system was challenged by the failure to detect stellar parallax, by inferences about very large star sizes, and by the failure to detect retrograde motion of comets. These would all be eventually resolved, but not until the 19th century in some cases. If the Earth is moving, one might expect to observe its motion reflected in the apparent path of comets, but that so-called retrograde motion was not detected. Grossi, who observed 3 comets in 1618, was a leading Jesuit astronomer in Rome at this time. This manuscript consists of notes for Grossi's lectures at the Jesuit University, the Collegio Romano, in which he reported Galileo's telescopic discoveries. I'm sure Brother Guy would join us in thanking the athletic department for their assistance in acquiring this manuscript. Finally, Brother Guy might take us to the gallery entitled The Galileo Affair, in which he would explain the complex relations between the Bible and science for good and for ill. Here are 15th century editions of Augustine's City of God, Aquinas' Masterwork of Theology, and other works. And at this point, we might discuss with Brother Guy whether there would have even been a trial of Galileo if church leaders at that time had only interpreted the Bible according to the principles articulated by Augustine and Aquinas. Brother Guy might point our attention to this 16th century commentary on the book of Job, in which the theologian Zuniga mounted a stout defense of Copernicus. But I'm sure Brother Guy would explain the significance of Galileo's letter to the Grand Duchess Christina, in which Galileo showed how to interpret Scripture so that there is no conflict between Copernicus and the Bible. He cited Augustine throughout. Like Augustine and Galileo, Brother Guy believes in the need for science and religion to work alongside one another. In 2006, he wrote, "Religion needs science to keep it from superstition and keep it close to reality." So maybe those are some of the things we would see and do on a tour of Galileo's world with Brother Guy. Our final imaginary tour is guided by Nick Wilding. Dr. Wilding is a historian of science with a special interest in the history of the book. He has held fellowships at Stanford, Cambridge, and Columbia University, among others. Dr. Wilding would take us to the Galileo Affair Gallery, and there point us to the Dialogo, Galileo's dialogue on the 2 chief systems of the world. The OU copy contains Galileo's own handwriting as validated by Stillman Drake several decades ago. Galileo wrote it as a dialogue between 3 fictional characters, Salviati, Sagredo, and Simplicio. Dr. Wilding has recently published a study of the real person that lies behind the character of Sagredo, Galileo's idol, Gianfrancesco Sagredo, and the Politics of Knowledge. Because of his interest in the history of the book, Dr. Wilding might take us to the Aldine edition of Aristotle, printed in the 15th century. He might ask us to ponder the mystery of this 1545 edition of Sacrobosco, from which pages have been torn out. We can see their remnants in the gutter. At a nearby activity station, he might lead us through an origami exercise in descriptive bibliography to learn the anatomy of early printed books. In Galileo Engineer, Dr. Wilding would have us look closely at the Compasso, the manual for Galileo's engineering compass. Note how crisply the metal type has cut into the paper. This is likely the first copy off the printing press. It contains Galileo's handwriting in the form of corrections that were adopted in all other known copies. Then Dr. Wilding would surely take us back to view the Starry Messenger at the Fred Jones. As already mentioned, this book is the first published report of observations made with a telescope. It made Galileo an international celebrity overnight. You can see that Galileo inscribed the Oklahoma copy, as shown here. It was a gift to a poet in the Medici court. But in 2012, Wilding was able to prove that a special copy of the Sidereus Nuncius, which contained ink drawings of the moon, purportedly from Galileo's own hand, was actually a forgery. Dr. Wilding was not persuaded by an international team of experts who had just published 2 authoritative monographs authenticating the copy based on scientific and forensic evidence. Like Inspector Columbo, Dr. Wilding turned everything upside down and was eventually proven correct. So this captivating story is now told in his new book, Faussaire des Lunes. He will share that story with us in his talk today, Forging the Moon. I don't know about you, but I would like to go on every one of these imaginary tours. And that is just what we are going to do in the rest of our time today. We have the opportunity to listen to to leaders in their field, some of the best guides to Galileo's world on the planet. So let's welcome our speakers to the Galileo's World Symposium.